All right, so we have quite a few people who have joined. Again, thanks for all of you for coming out. I'm really excited to share with you our panelists and to let them share with you their experience as shark scientists and their current research. And actually, I'm really excited to learn about their research as well. So I just want to thank Diversity of Nature for their ongoing support with this event, and MEOPAR for their support with the event today and with logistics of the event today. So we're going to be running this as kind of an open discussion, and we really want to encourage you guys to ask questions and raise your hand if you have any questions as well. And we'll be revealing our panelists in just a few short minutes. So we want to begin by acknowledging that we are in Micmac, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Micmac people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Micmac and Welastoqiyik Maliseet people have first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Micmac and Welastoqiyik Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So we are all treaty people. And I've posted a link in the beginning of the chat that actually gives you a site called nativelands.ca. And if you go on this site, you can see what native territorial land, traditional territorial land you exist on currently or where you're coming from. So when we have a question later on about where you're from or where you're joining us today, keep that in mind and try to include that in your answer. That would be fantastic. So first we'll get started with our icebreaker questions, and those are questions to you, our participants. So if you want to go ahead and answer the polls that are popping up on your screen now while I go through the rest of the itinerary for today, that would be fantastic. So next, afterwards, we will reveal our panelists. Then we'll have presentations from each of our panelists, just in a brief introduction. And then the moment you've all been waiting for, we'll have our live Q&A session. So I'll start off the session with a few questions that some of you sent in during registration. And then afterwards, we really encourage you to send messages and send questions in the chat, send questions by raising your hand, even if there's a time when there's a period of silence and you want to unmute yourself and just say hi and ask your question, that would be fantastic. And then lastly, we'll do our prize draw for the Manta adoption live at the end of this session. So now I'll just be working through our icebreaker questions. So this is just to give us an idea, a general idea of where everyone's coming from today, what kind of studies you're doing in your studies, what your area of expertise are in. It looks like a lot of you are biologists, which is great, but we also have some social scientists as well joining us, so that's exciting. And then we also want to get a feel for what level of education you have. So it looks like we have quite a range of undergraduate, masters, PhD students, and industry professionals as well. And then finally, we just want to know what your favorite shark species is. So for me, my favorite shark species is probably the whale shark, although it's really hard for me to decide because there's so many interesting ones out there. So it looks like almost all of you have answered so far, and it's great to see that there are so many of you coming from different parts of the world. Here are our results today, so you can take a scroll through. Feel for most people are from biology, which makes sense. It's really who I targeted this audience to, but also policy and social science and business and economics. So it's great for whoever you are in this case that's coming from those backgrounds that you've also decided to join us today. And again, we have a range of people from all different levels of their academic career as well.
So just recapping the poll, I have the live results in front of me from Zoom. Looks like lots of folks are joining from Halifax, Mi'kmaq. We also have some folks coming in from the States. We have someone from Portland, someone from, I thought I saw Arizona. We also have folks from the UK as well as the Philippines. So really incredible to see how far and wide we're reaching. And
Yeah,
for
fantastic.
shark array species, lots of folks said the whale sharks, bull sharks, hammerhead sharks, the mobula ray, Greenland shark, pajama shark. Also love the pajama shark. That one's really cool. Oceanic white tip, scalloped hammerhead, thresher shark. That one's my favorite.
Wow.
Mako, and Happy Eddie. I'm not sure I've heard of that one.
Oh, I actually just heard of the Happy Eddie. It's like it's endemic to South Africa, I guess, as well. But that's amazing to hear all the variety of responses. Thanks, Alexa. So I think you'll all really benefit from meeting our shark scientists and learning a bit more about shark species. Great, it seems like a lot of you already know a bunch of shark species, so that's fantastic. Oh, the wobbegong, yeah, wobbegong is also a really great shark, or goblin shark. They're both very interesting. So now that we've gotten to know a bit about you guys and your favorite shark species and where you're from, again, it's fantastic to see the range of people that are joining us from all across the globe. So now we're going to do a short exercise with all of you. So I want you all to think in your mind, just kind of picture, you don't necessarily need to close your eyes, but picture in your mind what a shark scientist looks like to you. So picture someone in the field working with sharks, tagging sharks. What do they look like in your mind? And so now that you have that mental image, we're going to go ahead and start showing our shark panelists. So all the panelists, if you could turn on your cameras and share who you are, that would be fantastic. So now that everyone sees our shark panelists, I hope that you guys did picture these people when you thought of shark scientists, but we just wanted to exhibit that when you're watching things in the media, you kind of see, like for sharks even, you see the great white shark, hammerheads, all these kind of most famous shark species that are only shown in the general media. But just like there's a huge diversity of shark species out there, there's also a huge diversity of shark scientists out there. And there's a lot of different people that are all working behind the scenes to do their best to conserve shark species around the globe. So today in our discussions, we're going to be talking about and learning from all of these amazing panelists about their experience in shark science and their research. But we also want to keep in mind that although shark science, you can get far in shark science by putting a lot of effort in and working hard towards your goals, there are still systemic issues with being able to progress in shark sciences, and there are biases that we all have to work towards reducing and helping make shark science accessible to anyone that is really passionate. So yeah, so we'll get started with our presentations then. Nakia, if you want to share your screen first, and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nakia Cullain. I'm a PhD student at Dalhousie University, a research scientist for the Marine Megafauna Foundation. And my species that I work with is manta rays in Mozambique. So I was excited to hear that someone at least said mobula ray. So I think that was actually the only ray species that was mentioned in people's favorite species. So yeah, I work with these gentle giants that feed on plankton, have no stinging barb, and are ridiculously massive. So I do a whole bunch of different research with manta rays. Mantas have specific spot patterns on their bellies where we can use photo identification as a form of individual ID, just like a fingerprint. So I'm collecting photo ID data. That's me down at the bottom here underneath the manta. As you can see, they're quite massive animals. I'm also collecting measurements to get growth rates and population growth estimates. Collecting samples. As I said, I'm in Mozambique, so it makes it a little bit difficult. Our conditions can be challenging. We do a lot of stuff directly on the boat, but trying to collect as many samples for genetics and stuff like that. And more recently, I've really got into telemetry, so acoustic and satellite telemetry. We can talk more about this in the discussion if people are interested. So trying to get a better understanding of their movement patterns in Mozambique and into South Africa. And I'm doing all of this because manta rays are very, very vulnerable species, particularly in Mozambique, where they face a lot of different threats, fishing being their biggest threat, but also, changes in the environment, climate change, all of these different things that may affect their populations and their distribution. So I'm just trying to collect as much data and information as possible to better understand these wonderful animals. So that is me.
Thank you, Nakia. Yeah, your research is very exciting, especially with manta rays. I think a lot more people need to be aware of how cool rays are. Like, I initially went into shark science and then was able to work with some rays, and it's always been a really amazing experience. So thanks, Elise, for the let's hear it for the batoids. Yes, they're definitely an amazing species. So it doesn't look like we have questions in the chat so far for your presentation. Oh, actually, one question just came in, Nakia. So how do you measure the manta rays? Do you bring a measurement tape and measure them right in the field, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I just saw the sea pancakes. There's a couple different ways that you can measure manta rays. So the way that I do it is called laser photogrammetry. So essentially, there's two laser pointers at a set distance apart with a camera in the middle. And so when you project that laser onto the manta, you have a known distance, and then you can calculate the disc length or width based on that. But there's also different forms of stereo video, and I mean, I guess you could take a measuring tape. I feel like that would be really, really difficult. They move a little bit fast, and yeah, but I mean, I guess it could be possible. But I think the laser photogrammetry and the stereo video are the most common ways.
Yeah, very cool. It's great that there's that new technology to, well, newish. It probably has been in the field for quite a while now, but great that we're now able to measure mobile large species that are, yeah, definitely hard to measure with a measuring tape, especially when you're in the water. So we have a few other questions here, so I'll just go over the specific questions to your presentation, and then some of the more general questions will maybe wait till the general Q&A to work on. So one question was, what is telemetry, or how would you explain it?
So telemetry is tagging of an animal. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can tag animals. I'll, I guess, just focus on the two different methods that I use. So there's acoustic telemetry, which is a little tag that has a transmitter, and then you have acoustic receivers that detect that information if the animal comes close enough to the receiver. Satellite tagging actually transmits the information to the satellite in the sky, then back down to the ground to the researchers to get the movement data of the movements of the animals. There's a lot more I could talk about. We can maybe talk more in detail at the end. I don't want to take up too much time, but yeah, that's kind of the general overview.
Oh, for sure. Very cool. Thank you for giving that brief overview on telemetry. And I'm sure that there are other panelists here who also use telemetry, so we can definitely talk more about that as well in our Q&A.
Yeah, happy to talk.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess for now, we'll move on to our next panelist.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So my name is Ana Martins. I'm originally from Brazil. I did both my undergrad and my master's in my hometown. And during that time, I developed a project that was trying to understand the relationship between fishing communities and sharks. I wanted to know if they understood the threats that sharks were facing and try to understand why they were still fishing sharks. And this all happened in the northeast region of Brazil. So I would just travel across the coast and spend a couple of months living with these communities and just observing, trying to actually have a perspective, their perspective on shark fisheries and trade. Then I moved all the way across the world. I went to Australia to do my PhD. And there I worked on a project that was looking at the movement patterns and the trophic ecology of juvenile sharks and rays within a nursery area in the Great Barrier Reef. So in this project, we use telemetry as well. In this case, we use just the acoustic telemetry because the satellite tags that Nakia just mentioned, they're like yay big and heavy, and they don't work for those tiny little baby sharks and rays. So we used small acoustic tags on these animals, and I wanted to know where they were going, how they're using their habitats, what area they prefer to hang out. And we also collected a lot of blood and tissue samples to understand their position in the trophic web. So what they were eating, what was eating them, because they're like baby sharks, they're not major predators. And I did most of my work on batoids, so yay, sea pancakes. And now I am a postdoctoral fellow at Dalhousie University, and I worked on a project that aims to uncover the global shark meat trade. And just to give you all some perspective on the shark meat trade, I feel like when we talk about shark trade, we generally think of fins. So, and that's partially true. There's a huge trade of shark fins that peaked in like 30, 20 years ago. But truth is that sharks have mostly been caught since the beginning of times because of their meat. They are a source of food for many, many coastal communities. Pretty much every country catches sharks and consumes sharks in some way. And the global trade of shark meat actually overtakes the global shark fin trade in both value and volume, sorry. And when we talk about international trade of shark meat, everything that is traded, it's put into general categories. So the only information we have is shark. When we have that information, sometimes it's just fish. So we don't actually know what happens. So the main goal of our project is to get this general information and provide as many details as we possibly can. And we do that by using a combination of field work and a lot of statistical modeling. So just to give you all an example, let's say there is a hypothetical shipment from Canada of 10 tons of shark meat to, let's say, Germany. And what we want to be able to do is to actually say, hey, actually here, we have 50% of mangrove reef rays and 15% of black tip reef sharks, and provide all this species-specific information that we really need for management and conservation. And that's me in my work in a really short and quick way. So I'll take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, that's really interesting about how, again, in the media, you see a lot of shark finning being the biggest reason for sharks declining across the globe. But shark meat trade, I think you were talking about that in our module before that I took from you as well, is a huge, huge industry and surpassing shark finning. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that with everyone as well, because I think it's something a lot of people should know about. So we have a couple questions. So we have one, which is, what is the most eaten shark species, and does this vary across the globe?
No, it's actually blue sharks. So those are the most common species. And surprisingly, as far as we know, the populations have not fully collapsed yet. So people continue to fish them quite a lot. Then there are some specific species that are characteristic of each region, and then they will vary a lot. But blue sharks are like huge.
Oh, that's surprising. I didn't really know that blue sharks were eaten all that much. So that's news to me too. That's really interesting.
Especially when it comes to international trade, because there's a lot of local consumption, but not all species are traded internationally. But blue shark, it seems to be a favorite everywhere.
Okay, is that because there's less regulations for blue sharks, or just because they're easy to catch mostly?
No, I think it's just the taste is not like really strong. So people just enjoy the taste. The price is relatively low, and that's just an easy species to catch. So
that's really interesting. It's interesting how taste and flavor also has obviously an influence on what people want to eat and buy. So we have another question, which I think could be answered by other panelists as well, but did working with local communities change your perspective on the shark meat trade?
Absolutely. I like to say I had a more like an activist perspective when I started working with sharks. My only goal was to protect them and conserve them. I did not understand the layers of complexity that involved in the relationships between like humans and sharks. So definitely changed my perspective. I see things now more like in a management, and I see management first before I see conservation, because I feel like this is the way to go. I think most of the conservation strategies, they only focus on not letting humans have any interactions with sharks, tend to fail. So it's really important that we take those perspectives in consideration as well if we want to succeed and actually conserve the shark species.
For sure, yeah, it's really important. Yeah, I think if you do just go in and go in really strong, which I know some conservationists do, and they go in and they say, you guys are bad people for eating these sharks and you should just stop immediately. That's not really, you have to show empathy towards other humans before they'll actually listen to what you have to say, for sure.
True.
So I have another question here. We're getting lots of questions coming in now about the shark meat trade. I'm sure that there's lots of people who are super interested in this. So we'll just go over a couple more of these questions and then we'll move on to our next speaker, because I know Zoya can also speak to the shark meat trade as well. So one question is, how common is it to find shark contaminated items in Canada, for example?
Canada is not a huge consumer of shark meat. Also, there's not many fisheries specific for sharks. So it's not a huge deal here. But in other places in the world, is some of the, like from Brazil, for example, is the major importer of shark meat, and there's a huge consumption of shark meat as well. So yeah, there are things that are a little bit different, but here in Canada is not a massive problem.
Okay, well that's good to hear also, being Canadian. So then I have one more question we'll go over for now, which is, how does the price of shark meat compare to other types of fish?
Generally, overall, it's cheaper, but not all species. As I said, the preferences change a lot across the globe, varying according to species that are available in each region, according to the price, according to cultural, religious aspects, and so on. And there are places for specific shark or ray species that the price is actually higher. So it will vary a lot.
Okay. I guess that does make sense for such a global industry and different demands across the world, for sure. Okay, so we'll move on to our next panelist for now. So Zoya, if you want to share your screen and get your presentation started. Thank you for answering all those questions, Anna. I know there's a lot more questions about shark meat trade coming up, so we can definitely address those in the final Q&A as well.
Sounds good. Zoya will answer some right now too, I believe.
All right, you can go ahead, Zoya.
Thanks a lot, Emily. Hi, everyone. I'm Zoya Tyabji, and I'm really just taking you through my journey to what led me here. So currently I'm a PhD student with Dalhousie University, and I'm from India, where I was born and raised. I was very lucky to have had a lot of my summers near the coastline. And that kind of really just fueled my passion for the sea. And I realized that the sea was kind of my therapy. It inspired and relaxed me. And I also wanted to give back. So very naively, I wanted to save the sea because I saw it eroding over time, and I saw a lot of sand mining happening and it becoming polluted. But unfortunately, I was also surrounded by people who were terrified of the sea, despite growing up along the coast. And they thought that the sea, they view the sea as a garbage bin, where if you throw something in, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So I had a really difficult time navigating what exactly it meant to be a marine biologist. I did both my undergrad and my master's in India, working on terrestrial systems, really. So I volunteered a lot just to get into the wildlife field. And then I shifted. So I grew up on the northwest coast of India, and I shifted to the Andaman Islands here and worked as an education officer. And during this time, it really exposed me to what being a marine biologist meant. And I got to interact with a lot of other scientists as well. And I worked on sea crates and coral reefs. While working on coral reefs, I realized that, like, despite all the diving we did, I didn't really see any sharks and ray species underwater. But when I spoke to all the local communities, they said that, you know, there were a lot of species that they used to see on the coastlines itself. So I was just wondering where they went. And one visit to the fish landing site, I saw thousands of sharks being landed there, and I realized that there were management plans in place. Like, there were 10 species of sharks and rays that were banned to be caught in India, and amongst others. But we didn't have any basic idea of even what shark and ray species were found in our waters. So I left the glamorous life of diving in coral reefs and started visiting fish landing sites. And I went in again with this naive idea that to save the species, you kind of have to use top-down approaches where, you know, you just require bans, and you also just need to study the species. So I was studying the catch composition and life history traits of sharks and rays landed by visiting the landing sites. And during this time, I also interacted with a lot of fishers and realized that you need to also realize their perceptions, because banning species had a very negative impact on their lives, because this was their livelihood. So I interviewed a lot of fishers over there and studied the utilization and trade of sharks and rays. So what the perceptions of fishers towards sharks and rays were, why they were catching it, what the local communities, why the local communities were consuming sharks and rays, also where the sharks and rays were going. So not all species are, some of them are domestically consumed, some of them are also traded internationally. And currently I'm working with the Global Shark Meat Project that Anna introduced you to. So I'm going to be studying shark and ray meat trade with a focus in India. So looking at the consumption practices, because we do have different communities consume sharks differently. For example, the fishers consume it because it's probably the easiest, they catch it, so it's like an easy source of protein, whereas other demographics, they consume it because they actually like the taste of it. Whereas there are a few cultural practices in India where smaller sharks and ray species are consumed because there are beliefs that it improves your health. So documenting all those cultural practices and also mapping, so looking at what sharks and ray species contribute to the meat trade, and mapping the supply chain of the entire shark meat in India. Yep, that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Zoya. That's really amazing work that you are working on with Anna as well. And yeah, doing that on the ground work, maybe not as glamorous as diving around coral reefs, but just as important to be on the ground with the local people and looking directly at the shark meat trade. So So we have a couple of questions so far. So one of them is, what are some approaches you've taken / we can take to work with local communities or fisher people instead of against them?
A lot of the management practices that existed in India itself were activists who came to the fish landing site and they saw a lot of dead sharks and they wanted to ban it. And that backfired, because initially there was a blanket ban on all sharks and ray species, but for fishers, they can't really choose which sharks and rays are caught in their gears. So I think the main thing is to just first listen to them, see what practices, because it would probably impact them the most, and even the population declines impacts them the most. So just listen to what they really suggest. And we found that a lot, especially in the Andaman Islands, a lot of fishers have shifted from, they do follow spatial regulations that they don't fish in certain areas. So just really listen to them and work with them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Always to listen and then to do other things to try to help sharks, for sure. So another question that we have is, are there traditional dishes in India made with shark meat? And you touched upon that a little bit, how there's preferences for different species, but if you could speak more on that, that'd be great.
So the smaller shark species are mostly consumed during festivals in the southwest coast of India. And there are shark curries made from them. And there are also there's also a tradition where smaller shark species are they basically are believed to benefit pregnant and lactating women, because there are a few species called the milk shark. That's a common name. I'm not sure exactly because milk sharks are a common name in English, but I'm not sure why exactly how that transferred to the knowledge transferred to them. But so they are mostly consumed, but other juvenile sharks are also misidentified to be milk sharks and consumed by pregnant and lactating women.
Yeah, but very interesting.
But there are mostly,
for sure. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if there are other traditional dishes, but I'll have to find out. But I know there are a lot of curries that are made.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that there are those beliefs, especially for pregnant women eating shark meat, especially if shark meat, some of it is so high in mercury content as well, which might have a detrimental effect. But I guess, is that part of when you talk to the local people as well about shark meat trade and eating shark meat?
So I haven't done that yet, so I'm not sure. But in the Andaman Islands, we also found that the declines in sharks and other valuable target fish had actually also led to an increase in rays being consumed because of the availability of rays. And people didn't really prefer ray meat just because it stinks a lot, but because of the availability, they used to consume it. So that's it. Yeah, I think it just varies a lot from species and also different regions.
Yeah, for sure. It's a global problem that can't be tackled with one blanket solution, for sure. So thanks Zoya for all that, your insight as well, and learning more about a bit of your research. And we'll move on to our next speaker.
So I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to kind of talk at you all. My name is Imani. I am a PhD student currently in New Jersey in the United States. And I study shark functional morphology and create bio-inspired robots. So those are two really dramatically different things, I think, than what most people hear when someone says they're a shark scientist. So functional morphology, I'm just going to define it broadly. Morphology is just form, so what something looks like. Functional morphology takes it a step further and goes, why do you look like that? What is the advantage to that? So really my study question is basically why shark? A really easy example of that is if you think of a hammerhead and you think of the hammer part of their head, the morphology part would just be pointing out that their head looks different than all other species outside of their family. The functional morphology part would be why did you evolve to have that head and what is the advantage or disadvantage that it might offer you? And I am really interested in shark skin. So shark skin and scales is very different than bony fish. It has a lot of advantages, including reducing drag when they're swimming and protecting them. And it has some really cool applications and is found all over sharks and actually is the reason that they have teeth. So I really like studying their skin and kind of figuring out what advantages it offers, why it's so diverse across sharks, and then talking about all the applications of it. And then bio-inspired robots are just robots that are created from examples in nature. So that could be creating a fish robot that you can put in a tank that will act the way you want it to, because fish never act the way that you want them to when you need them to do something. So for example, we're building a robot right now of a fish that you can't legally go and remove from its environment, so that you can research that in the lab without needing the live fish. And then outside of all of that, I am a co-founder of the nonprofit Minorities in Shark Sciences, which was founded in 2020 for women and gender minorities of color in shark science, because shark science and marine science, as we all know, is very pay to play and also has historically been very not welcoming to women, and especially women and gender minorities of color. So we create funding opportunities for them so that they don't have to pay to get into this field, as a way of hopefully making that not the norm anymore in our field, so that eventually people who want access to it can have it without being unable to because they come from a financially disadvantaged background.
Yeah, for sure. That is amazing work that Miss does. I know I was like surprised when I wanted to get into shark science, and really the only reason why I was able to move forward in my career was because I paid for an internship. But the cost of those can sometimes be really high and huge barrier for anyone that just wants to come into shark science that doesn't have that kind of money to move forward. So yeah, it's really great work that Miss does. And so I want to thank you again for being part of our panel today, because I know that you run this amazing organization and it's really awesome to have you here with us. Also, sharks and robots, that came out of the blue for me as well. I really didn't expect that from any of you today. So that's a great example of interdisciplinary work in shark science.
Yes, very, very interdisciplinary for sure.
Yeah. So we have a couple questions coming in now. So Nakia actually asked, can you make a Manta robot?
Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. One of the things with bio-inspired robots that you really have to consider is when you build something, you have to validate it. So when I say validate it, you need to make sure that it is correctly mimicking the actual thing that you're building, which is what makes it harder, because if you just build a robot from your head, right, there's not a model that it needs to perfectly represent. But if you are trying to build a fish to put in a lab to use in research papers, that needs to be validated as accurate so that that robot can directly correlate to the live thing that you want to be studying but can't. That would be really fun to make a Manta robot. My mind just started buzzing with how you would even do that. It would have to be a really big robot, but I love that idea.
Maybe this is a future collaboration at some point. You can make a Manta robot and study it for sure. So a couple more questions came in as we were talking about robots. So do you build the robots yourself, or are you more on the design side of things for?
Yeah, so I'm a first-year PhD student, so that means that I am learning a lot in these first 2 years of that. So for example, right now I have a model 3D printing at school for the fish robot that we're trying to build. And that does include learning the code to run a motor or to tell the robot what to do. So I do learn how to design and build it and code it, but a lot of times biologists and engineers will kind of work together, because the engineers can bring in the coding and the understanding of how to get a motor to run, something to walk, a fin to flap. And the biologist can really see it from, I guess, an artistic point of view and like what it actually needs to replicate and understand the environment that that fish would be in and mimic that on, a mechanical robot.
Yeah, I imagine you have a huge team of people all working together on that. Just like if many of us other biologists are working with stats that we have no idea how to use and have to get help with for sure. Yeah, that's great. So I'll ask a couple more questions before we move on to our final speaker. So someone else had a question of what kind of projects have your robots been put towards specifically? Are they only used to mimic real life species and interactions, or do they have other uses as well?
Yeah, so this is the first robot that I'm building, but I can give you some examples of other ones, for example. I think that the easiest would be one that my advisor's former master's student started, which is a remora shark tag. So if you guys know what a remora is, they're also called suckerfish, but they have this disc that sits on the top of their head, and it's considered a modified dorsal fin. And they suction on to sharks, manta rays, teleos fish, pretty much anything. They suction onto divers when they go diving. And they have this mechanism to be able to release off of that suction whenever they want. So it is like an active, I'm going to stick here, I'm going to unstick and stick somewhere else. So she had a former master's student who started building a tag based off of that suctioning mechanism because like I think one of the other speakers said earlier, right, if you have a small shark, you can't put a giant satellite tag on them because there's a lot of, detrimental effects that can have on them. And even on larger sharks in like great white tagging research, a lot of times those tags will lead to bacteria that you can see on their fins, and it can be quite invasive. So the idea behind this tag was that you could stick it on to virtually any shark at any size because you can scale it up or scale it down. And then you would add in a robot that would do the actual attachment and release mechanism for you. And the cool thing about remoras is on top of that disc, the way that their body is shaped is super streamlined. So they actually experience little to no drag when they're attached to any animal, which is not something that we have at all in any kind of application in anything. So that's one thing that my PhD project will probably be on, would be furthering that and really testing it out to see if it would work. I think I answered the question. I went on a tangent.
Yeah, I think you did answer the question there. Yeah, it was just about what you've been working on. So that's really interesting to hear about remora style tags. I think that would be fantastic, especially for trying to use non-invasive methods for a shark species in the future too. That sounds really great. Looking forward to seeing how that turns out, and maybe someday all of us can use those tags. We'll see. That'd be really exciting. Okay, so for now we're going to move on. Time is just zooming by. Thank you all for your questions. Really going fantastic, and as well as I could have hoped for, especially with all of your questions coming in. So we'll move on to our final, last but not least, speaker, Clemency. So if you want to share your screen, and I just want to remind everyone after this, we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask all of your questions again. We can discuss them.
So, well, thank you for having me as well. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. It's been really nice to hear everyone else's research and to be involved. So, yeah, thanks for that. My name's Clemency White. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Exeter, based in the UK. And yeah, we actually have a surprising amount of sharks here, which some people don't seem to know, but it's actually a very sharky place. And I'm currently doing my PhD with Professor Steve Simpson at the University of Bristol and Dr. Matthew Witt at the University of Exeter, studying the bioacoustics around sharks. So how they use sound in their ecology, and also how human-based or anthropogenic noises change that behavior. I also put some of my contact details. If anyone wants to contact me after, then please go ahead. So yeah, my kind of journey to where I got to with my PhD, well, first of all, I'm still on that journey, so I still don't really know where I'm going to end up. And a lot of the times I still don't really know how I ended up here. One of the pieces of advice that was kind of constantly given to me when I was first kind of trying to decide if I wanted to do a career in research was, you know, how did you get there? And people would always just say, oh, you know, that just kind of happened, or, you know, it just kind of worked out that way. And at the time I thought it was really unhelpful advice, but I would say that now, you know, I give it myself, and it seems that I'm just kind of perpetuating the cycle. But it's true that, you know, really just loving what you do and having a good motivation behind it is what drives you forwards, and you find opportunities that kind of fit those interests. For me, I was always fascinated just by the natural world. I loved just seeing animals in their natural environment and just asking questions about, you know, why they were there and what they were interacting with. So I did an undergraduate degree in zoology at the University of Bristol, and that was when I first did a course or even heard of sensory biology. I was also a student or, you know, a younger scientist who was really scared of maths and kind of scared of physics and chemistry. And I really thought I was going to be terrible at it, but I took a bit of a risk and did a class in biophysics at my undergraduate, and it really kind of carved the way for the rest of my career. It was really eye-opening, and it has really inspired me to think about the world as not just how humans perceive it, but actually that every different, you know, species, but even within a species, you know, computes its world in a completely different way based on the sensory systems it possesses, and also the, you know, variation within that sensory system. So after I kind of had that, I decided that I wanted to look at this in an animal like sharks, because sharks are such sensory specialists, and I was interested in seeing how they interacted with their world on a more interesting basis, or looking at it in ways that hadn't been done before. I did a master's degree at the University of York, where I studied marine environmental management, and I was lucky to do a lot of research, you know, in the Bahamas and also in Cuba and Belize throughout my research and internship experiences to get to that point. The PhD I do now is based in Exeter. I work with a really supportive and lovely research group in the Southwest, alongside, the University of Bristol and the University of Exeter. And we're interested now in having a look at how sharks use sound and how human-based sounds are changing how they interact with their environments. And the first question I get often when I tell people I study this is, do sharks even have ears? Like, can sharks even hear? And even fish, you know, you don't see fish with big ears like we do. And that's because their body is basically the same density as the water. So any sound wave that passes through the water will pass through the shark at the same kind of rate. And so they have just an inner ear. They don't need a big outer ear system that will kind of channel their air in. Instead, they just have these kind of otoconia, you know, dense crystals inside their head. And that's what translates sound. And what we know about fish is that when they're using sound to communicate, it's really important in things like courtship and reproduction. If you ever listen to, you know, a noise of a coral reef, it's actually really, really loud. And we've kind of been sold this misconception that the ocean is really quiet, but it's just because our ears are terrible. But if you actually listen to a lot of these recordings, you'll find that fish are using sound to do almost all the same things we use sound to do. It's how they find food, it's how they detect predators, it's how they find mates, and it's how they find habitat. And increasingly, we're now understanding that having big human-based sources of noise have really changed those interactions between fish and in marine mammals as well. And this can really lead to things like hearing damage, but even on a smaller scale, how, you know, parent fish defends their nests. We know that it can sometimes lead to starvation. It can lead to difficulties in finding available habitat. But really, we know nothing about sharks. And this was primarily because sharks don't make noise. So we don't always think that sharks are an animal that, you know, use sound to communicate with each other. But, you know, you can imagine being a shark and you hear a fish making a noise. That's probably a really good indication that there might be a prey source nearby. You know, if you're a shark and, you know, you're looking for a reef and you can hear the kind of cacophony that comes with a big reef system, that might be a really good cue in terms of navigating towards habitat and maybe finding a potential mate. And those are the kind of questions that we're interested in asking. And primarily we do this through 3 different major questions, which are looking at what sounds are available to sharks through passive acoustic monitoring. We also want to then know how are these sounds being used in ecology. And finally, if having anthropogenic noise in habitats is disruptive. And ultimately, our overall goal is to try and use this to develop mitigation tools to try and stop any of these negative effects having some of this effects we do already know that happen in fish-based systems. So yeah, that's ultimately kind of my research and how I got there.
Fantastic, thank you, Clemency. And you mentioned thanks for inviting you, but obviously we're very happy to have you as well. And I find your research very interesting about how noise can affect sharks. We often think of just direct impacts of sharks if they're hit by boats, but also just the noise of boats, or or maybe just think about pollution from waterways by large cities. But what about the noise of the cities in those areas as well? So definitely super interesting. Another caveat to think about what affects shark species. So I have a question here. So can you elaborate on other differences between shark sensory systems and our own?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the major thing that is really interesting about sharks is that they have an entire sensory system that we don't. So they are also capable of detecting electromagnetic fields. So that's something that's really important in their ecology, particularly on very small ranges. So they will detect buried prey through kind of pores on their nose or around their snout that allow them to detect the electromagnetic fields of prey. But sharks have all the other same sensory systems as us. The other 5 senses they have are the same, but the kind of way they use them and the operational ranges across which they do are quite different. So vision is still a very important sense in sharks, but obviously things like, being very active at night or hunting at, dawn and dusk, or even just having to deal with deep ocean or, high sediment and difficult visibility means that they don't rely on it as much as we do. Typically vision is considered a human primary or the most important one of our senses. It's our longest range. Whereas for sharks, hearing is thought to be the sense, that exists on the largest scales. So that's probably the one that they can use across bigger distances. And obviously we have this term that we call acoustic daylight, in that sharks are able to hear the characteristics of a habitat they're in, even at night, even in deep areas, even in times of low visibility. And that's kind of a major difference in how we use our hearing in a different way. But really a lot of the stuff we know about shark hearing is really limited. It's really difficult to study them, primarily because a lot of bigger sharks are very hard to keep in aquariums and to do audiograms on, which is where you get to understand which frequencies they detect and at what level. But also, even in the field, it's very hard to access them for playbacks. So a lot of the knowledge we base our understanding on is from a very small number of species. And so we really still don't understand exactly how they are using sound, which components of sound they use, and across which distances they're actually able to detect and respond to them. So that's hopefully something that we'll be able to kind of elaborate on in this project as well. The sharks do have taste buds, which I also think is interesting. I don't know anything about them. I don't think anyone has done a huge amount of research on them, but they can technically taste too.
Yeah, super. I actually didn't know that sharks had taste buds until a little while ago, so that's a very interesting fact as well. The fact that we share a lot of our senses with them is super interesting. But also that we don't know that much. That's kind of one of the things that I'm sure a lot of us are excited about with shark science, is that there's a lot of unknowns, and because they haven't been studied that much until recently. Mm-hmm. So I have another question. So can acoustic telemetry affect sharks or alter their behavior, so the sound of those receivers?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because it was something that I initially kind of had thought, but the way that acoustic telemetry works is it typically will work at a single frequency. And so that's how you're able to kind of have an interaction between a tag and a receiver, is that they're kind of on the same channel, so to speak. And the channels that typically are used in acoustic telemetry tend to be quite high frequencies. They have done some research into dolphins, and if dolphins can detect and respond to acoustic tags and their interactions between them. But sharks have really low frequency hearing capabilities. So typically the kind of sounds that we think sharks are sensitive to are low frequency and very kind of pulsed. So something that you would seem that would be similar to kind of like a struggling fish. That's what's attractive to sharks, and very high frequencies aren't something that we think they're capable of being able to detect. High frequencies also don't travel as far. So even though they are probably detected by animals that have high frequency hearing abilities, you'd have to be quite close to the sound source and able to hear them. But it's not impossible that some animals do, but it's unlikely it affects sharks.
Okay, that's good to know, because I'm sure that all of us want to make sure that we're affecting them as little as possible. So good to know that hopefully they can't hear those pings, or it doesn't affect them in too much of in any way, really. So I have a final question. I'll join a couple of questions together because they're both kind of related, but some research shows that whales have names for each other and hold conversations. Is this the case with sharks and rays too? And a kind of related question is, can sharks use their electroreception ability to communicate with each other at all?
Well, there's no evidence to say that they can. Sharks they're not kind of active, I guess, either in their acoustic abilities or in their electroreceptive abilities. So even though they're able to detect it, it's not something that they can emit. So sharks typically don't make noise. There's no evidence of any shark or ray to date, at least, that actively produces noise. We think that the way they use noise is really to kind of intercept the calls between other animals. So it's really fish calling to each other or calling in kind of distress is the kind of signals that they probably are picking up on. They do have, mechanisms of communication that are related to kind of vision. So we think that some markings on sharks might be a visual signal of, mate quality, for example. And bioluminescence is also something that deep sea sharks have that might be like a visual signal. And those are mechanisms of communication that probably do exist, but acoustically, sharks don't have any way to kind of communicate with each other that we know of. I mean, one exception to that, I guess, is things like manta rays and eagle rays that, that breach, animals that breach and, land on the surface. That is something that we don't have a great understanding. I'm sure that Nakia probably knows more about this, but I know that that's something that we have at least believed might be an acoustic signal. If you think a larger animal that might be able to say, that it's the fittest animal and will make a bigger noise on landing after breaching, that in itself could be a communication of some sort through noise, but that's a bit of a hypothesis. I don't think anyone has been able to prove that. In terms of electroreception, again, sharks are passively electroreceptive, so they can detect electromagnetic fields, but they don't emit them. Some rays do. Electric rays are able to do that, but I think that there is some freshwater rays that do use it in mate selection, but I'm definitely not an expert in that. I'm not an expert in electroreception at all. But sharks, I know at least, I don't think can electrically communicate, but it would be very cool if they could.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Maybe that's just something that we haven't figured out yet. Who knows? Yeah. There's so many questions still out there. So for now, I guess we'll start moving towards our open Q&A section of our event. So I know we have a few questions that haven't been addressed yet in the chat as well. So we can go over those, but also if anyone has questions for our panelists right now, they can also raise their hand or send another message in the chat as well, and you can actually unmute yourself and talk directly to our panelists. Oh, actually, so we have a question already coming in. That was very quick. Thank you, guys. So Hannah, if you want to unmute yourself and you can ask your question, you can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for all your really interesting talks. You're all my heroes. I'm like so impressed and inspired by all of you. And I was just wondering, this is sort of a question for everyone because you all work in such different but similar disciplines, but I find that in marine biology, specifically with shark research and I guess whale research, etc., there's a lot of stats and modeling and math and so much computer work. And I was just wondering how one can not get so caught behind the computer and stuck at the computer and actually work to make field opportunities and actually get out there, because I think it's really hard to I know there's like internships and stuff, but other than that, how can I like make opportunities for myself in the field and actually get out there and not be so stuck behind my computer?
If any of you want to answer to that, you can just go ahead and unmute yourselves, and I'm sure you all have a good answer to this. So
I can start because I think there was a question for me that was how much time I spend in the water compared to on land in the field. So I'm very fortunate, I think, because I started my own thing. So I kind of created this field station. So it looks like I spend a lot of time in the field, which I do, but I do also spend a lot of time behind a laptop and modeling and coding and doing all that stuff, which, has its benefits as well. It can be fun when you get into a groove. But yeah, I think, there's lots of field opportunities around the world, but like we've already spoke about, a lot cost a lot of money. There's not a lot of paid positions and that sort of thing. So it definitely does make it difficult. But I also think that, the world is moving so technical And we need people on the ground. We need people collecting actual data so that we can validate models and all of this stuff. So I think there is room for it. You just have to find the right path there, which is, I think, the difficult part. And I ended up in a rural village in Mozambique, and that was, yeah, I don't even know how it just happened. and so I don't know, it's definitely a difficult thing to navigate. I don't know if anyone else has some input on that, but yeah, that's where I stand.
Yeah, I feel, sorry, am I cutting? You go ahead. No, sorry. I feel like it's just difficult. I think the more we move forward in terms of improving our shark science and getting more detailed information, more and more we need the modeling part of it. I also studied this and I saw myself as a field scientist, and I always said I hate stats, so I'm never going to be doing it. And here I am doing my postdoc specifically on modeling because it's so important. I'm still not good at it. I'm still struggle with it a lot, but I feel like just removing that layer of I cannot do it, I don't want to do it, I hate this, I think it's really helpful, just to get you going, to get started. I'm sure there'll be opportunities, few opportunities that are just field related, but I feel like those are getting more and like really, really rare those days, especially if you're doing research, if you're doing a PhD or something like that. You're going to have to analyze the data at some point. So.
Yeah, one thing I might add quickly is that I think when I started doing my PhD, I knew that my major motivation was to, do the science all the way through. And that was something that I really cared about. And it is really important that the outputs are, properly done, and that it's something that you put time into. It's also good if you have the opportunity to study it while you're at university to like take the opportunity, because now I wish that I had opportunities to like take extra classes in modeling. And when I was doing it, I just kind of wished I wasn't there at the time. But there's also loads of ways that you can be involved in, jobs in shark research or in ocean sciences that don't, take the traditional route of doing a PhD. I know plenty of people who work, at field stations or as research assistants, research associates, and their primary purpose is to do the field work and assist on those things. And it does mean that you don't get, the full circle all the time. You're not always going to be able to see the outcomes or like be involved in the technical part of then getting, the nice part of seeing the results. But it does often sometimes mean you're spending more time in the field. Again, some people who work in the media, who can spend a lot of time in the field too. So there are plenty of other ways that you can spend time in the field that aren't, doing research in kind of an academic way.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are a lot of positions out there that aren't necessarily, research and academic based. There's a lot of outreach positions at different labs across the globe as well. And yeah, I think it's just part of trying to find where you fit best into the field of shark and ray science and conservation, whether that is actually collecting data and doing science, or if that's just working in media and trying to increase people's awareness of sharks as well. So we have a couple other people with their hand up. I think Laurence is that, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I think you had your hand up first. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So short background, I'm just gonna tell a short background. It's related to my question. So I'm from the Philippines, and unfortunately there is not a lot research done on sharks. And given the biodiversity of the Philippines, it's sad. Right now I'm doing my master's, and my field is actually microplastics, which is very far from sharks. So I really want to do sharks for my PhD project, but unfortunately I cannot find any project here locally in the Philippines, and I think my only chance to be a shark scientist is to apply abroad or internationally. So what advice can you give to me as an aspiring scientist that can actually increase my chance in entering into foreign schools with shark science programs? Thank you very much.
Yeah, great question. Zoya, or sorry, I thought you had unmuted. Yes, that's a great question. I can't speak to that, but if anyone else has experience with applying to schools abroad, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I can actually go first because I was on a similar trajectory when I started off. So I just ended up volunteering a lot. And it doesn't always have to be on Shark Science because you learn a lot volunteering through other projects too. So you just build up on those skill sets. And I started my with help. So I got in touch with a lot of with an advisor, an expert who was studying sharks and rays. And I wrote a grant to study my own project in the Andaman Islands where nobody was working on sharks at that time. But if you reach out, there are a lot of experts and a lot of scientists who are really ready to help you too. So if you reach out to them, I'm sure even they can help out. So those were the two things that, yeah, really helped me.
It was very similar for me, also coming from Brazil. And in Brazil, like you do your undergrad in the university that is closer to your home. We don't have any like sort of programs that allow you to pick the university that you go into and to pick the programs that you go into. So in my university back home, there was also no research on sharks. And I had no resources to do my own research. So I started going to the fish markets myself. I started reading a lot and coming up with low cost projects that I could do. So I could take the bus and go to the markets and see what sharks and rays were being traded, were being caught, and getting some information here and there. And then I would go to professors at that university at the time and like, hey, can we maybe try and work a little bit more on this? And to move outside of Brazil, I did a very similar thing that Zoya did. I just started contacting people that I was reading papers. So like, I really like this topic. I really like those few folks here that are writing this paper. So I'm going to send them a message and ask for opportunities that are potentially coming up. But I got to say, there are some researchers in the Philippines. So maybe if you want to send me your contact, we work with some people there. I can maybe share their contacts with you if you want. Can't promise that we'll have an opportunity there, but it will be a good start, right? So just, yeah, if you can just send me your email, I'll send you some contacts.
Okay, great. And also, if you can't get an email over, I also have participant emails from those who logged in. So or else if you give us permission to do that, then we can share your email from there as well. So another raised hand from Bailey Clark, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question as well, and then we'll move to some of the questions that we have in the chat as well.
Hi, thank you. I'm currently in vet school and I have an interest in pursuing research, and I really am interested in shark science. I was wondering if anybody ever works with veterinarians or you have any veterinarians on your research teams.
I'm gonna say I have a friend, his name's Jimmy Johnson. He is a veterinarian. He was at the St. Louis Zoo. I think he moved, but he specializes in elasmobranch vet stuff. I don't even know what the correct word for that would be. He's actually come out in the field with us multiple times to perform what are those things called where you see inside their stomachs? Ultrasounds. Yes, ultrasounds. Yeah. He's come in the field with us multiple times to do ultrasounds. He's also shown us better techniques for drawing blood on really small rays. So he's actually been really crucial and helpful in the research that I've participated in. And if you want his email or something, you guys can share my email and I can put you in contact with him. Definitely, he's a really great mentor, and I'm sure he'd be really happy to talk to you about his journey.
I also worked with a veterinarian when I was doing my PhD in Australia. She was doing her own project, which are something to do with an environmental DNA. But she will also go in the field with us and help us, teach us how to draw blood properly, how to collect tissue samples, and also really important because we were taking several samples from the same animals. She was the one to to teach us how to understand if the animals were like too stressed, and we had to stop when that moment come. So yeah, I can also share her contact with you.
Yeah, and maybe it would be good if at the end of this, I can send out, if the panelists are okay with that, send out emails for contact information if anyone wants to reach out later. Yeah, that would be great. And then that way, everyone, if you have extra questions that didn't get answered today, you can ask them at another time as well. So I'm just going through the chat here. We've been getting a lot of questions. And Amani, I think you answered some of those already, so that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. But I guess one question here is kind of generally, what was your academic journey for a lot of you? I know some of you touched on that already, but for somebody that maybe is starting from different academic points, if you're starting from an undergrad that's not necessarily in shark science, or starting with maybe your grades aren't as high as you would like them to be to begin with, or kind of what is your advice on like what kind of paths people can take to try to get to the academic side of shark science if that's something that they're interested in pursuing?
I think that I kind of commented in here, but I really like this question because I think that when most people look at scientists, they think that we all got like 4.0s and went up to like calculus 4 and we're really good at math and physics. My graduating GPA from undergrad was a 2.7. I was on academic probation for a year. I had below a 2.5 for 3 out of my 4 years of undergrad. And that's not because I wasn't trying, it's because I really had a hard time in academics and doing exams. I failed calculus and retook it. I failed pre-calculus and retook it. Tests and school is not for everyone, and we do not all learn in the same way. And I think that that is definitely something that people in academia are slowly learning and understanding. I also didn't do a master's. I skipped right to a PhD. And I think that the biggest things that I did, because I knew I was going to struggle through college, because I did the same thing in high school and middle school, was I really sought out as many experiences as possible to show that I could do research. Because one of the biggest things that I really want everyone to understand is that how well you do in school is not at all indicative of your ability to do any kind of research. I do research that involves a lot of math now. And just because I could not do it in college does not mean that I can't do it now. I know how to code, I know how to create things, I know how to print things for robots. Your ability to succeed in school and memorize things for exams does not show your ability to succeed in literally whatever area you want to succeed in. And I feel comfortable saying that everyone who I have talked to who are professors have said the exact same thing to me, that they understand that you are not just book smart in life, right? You have to be able to actually apply things, not just show that you can memorize them for an exam. Which I know, like, if I was in undergrad right now and someone was saying that to me, I'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, I still feel like crap. And that's completely reasonable. And that's exactly how I felt. But if me saying out loud, and being honest about how I did in college makes you feel any better, then I hope it does. And I'm always happy to talk to people more about all of that. I think my advice is just to compensate in other ways, get opportunities to do research and really show that you will work, 120% for that person and be a good employee for them. And then that person won't care if you failed calculus, because you've shown them that you can show up and do the work, because that is one thing that you cannot teach people, is the ability to show up and actually do the work and care about it. So yeah, that's my other tangent that I give on like every panel that I do.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer. Really great answer. Definitely academics is not all that matters for if you want to show people that you can be a shark scientist. And I'll admit too, I feel like my grades were not the best, and it took me a long time to find a master project that I could work on, but definitely got there by putting in 120% all the time. And it's really tiring, but it's worth it in the end. Yeah, for sure. So here's another really great question. This is something that I thought we could touch on as well. is if anyone is comfortable answering, what are some of the challenges that women, especially women of color, face in your fields? To follow up, how can biology do better? Anyone wanted to touch on that?
I can if no one else wants to. I just don't want to like take over.
No, feel free, go ahead.
Okay, well, so I'll just speak, from my experience as a woman of color. I will also say that I'm a woman of color in the United States. So even if I'm still treated differently, I have more privilege than someone who is not from the US or does not speak English, for example, or that isn't their first language. So in the US especially, when you're a woman of color, right, you're at the intersection of misogyny and racism. So you have these like two competing things that you are standing right in the middle of. And that makes it really hard because you're essentially facing two additional things on top of just being a woman in that space. And that typically shows up in people telling you that you are not welcome in that space, that you don't have enough knowledge to be in that space, talking over you, not, thinking that your ideas are good ones. And, that applies, to pretty much all women, I would say, in our field, especially, that like probably most of the panelists can agree that that is a thing that they might or might not have experienced at some point. In general, I think that the thing that biology can do better, especially in our field, is not be protective of the people who perpetuate those things. There are a lot of people who I would consider to be problematic because they in their labs will let those things go on. And part of being a good mentor and moving the field in a direction that makes it a welcoming place for everyone is making it known that those behaviors are not acceptable. And that can be really hard, especially when, power dynamics come into play and the person who's treating you unfairly is your advisor or the head of the lab that you want to get into. That can all be really challenging. So really, I think like just be a nice person and biology can be better. Like just be a genuinely nice human being and we can all be happy together. And also recognize your own biases that you have and figure out how you can make those better as well.
That's a great answer because like it sounds like a really simple thing, being nice, but you come across a lot of people there aren't, and it's more common than we wish it were. In my case, I've experienced a lot of, especially in the field. I don't know what's with men in the field catching sharks, and something happens, they feel like really powerful. I don't know, but they automatically assume that you cannot do anything. You cannot hold a shark, you cannot take samples because you're a woman. Like they have to do it for you. They need to push you aside and show that they can do it by themselves, which is really annoying. And the other thing I would mention is also the fact that when I started my PhD, I did not speak English, and the fact that you take a little more time to come up with a sentence in your head before you are able to actually make that into words. And people just assume that like they can talk over you, or you just don't know what you're talking about, or we just don't have the same education or as good education as everyone else. So it's been challenging. I can say that not everyone is nice and not everyone cares. So yeah, this side of shark science, it sucks.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to both of theirs. Great answers, by the way. Yeah, so when I got in, again, I think a lot of, at least in India, there was a lot of focus on coral reefs, really, where we were. And I think all the women had a really hard time getting into that field. So surprisingly, women, actually all the really good work in India is being done on shark science is being done by women. Going in, like when I first wrote my grant, I was a young researcher and I was being advised by a woman who was not from India. So a lot of scientists themselves in India told me that I can't do this and that, you'll never be able to get any information or you just won't be able to do it. Surprisingly, it was the fishers who helped me the most. And because they were the ones who said that, you know, other people just come here and like just bullshit really. But I was the first person who went and spoke to them and like put in the work, like of going early in the morning and seeing what sharks and rays were landed. And surprisingly, yeah, they were the ones who really helped me. And after I published a paper, all the shark scientists basically told me that you're a woman, which is why you could do all the work that you did. So I would also say that like probably find your tribe, and yeah, like don't be afraid to like step out of the toxic environment and just like look for opportunities outside too.
Yeah, and I think kind of adding on to that a little bit from what Zoya said in terms of like finding your tribe, I think there's like a really important part in, especially in academia and through like field stations, that you are often in really isolating environments, or like the dependence that you have on a few people for, you know, the success of your research or for your funding or for, you know, your ability to kind of take the next step is usually really tied to a few or a single person. And that's something that's really, really difficult, I think, to kind of get around. And there is so much power in talking to people and also having a community that exists of, you know, women who know each other and, you know, have experienced similar things and can talk about it. And kind of like Imani touched on, having that, you know, power to be able to talk about these things and see other people doing it is really empowering. And again, having panels like this are really comforting for me to even just hear other people's experiences and know that, you know, what happened to you might be something that's quite similar, and know that there is a community of people out there who can help you, even if the situation you find yourself in is quite isolating. So yeah, and thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll just respond to Simon's question about my situation, being a white woman in Mozambique, which is kind of the complete opposite. And it's definitely been challenging. And I think when I first arrived, it took a lot of time to have them respect me and work with me and all of these things, because I'm a foreigner, come from, you know, a very privileged background, and they obviously recognize that. So when I first arrived, it was a lot of trial and error, seeing, you know, I don't want to step on their toes, but I want to get involved. And I mean, I've been there for 6 years now, and I can confidently say that I have like a very good relationship with the local people, with the local fishers, and they've kind of included me as part of their community. And it's just a very special thing, but it took a lot of time to get there as an outsider. And yeah, but now I can say that we're all working together, which is very nice.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess overall, it's just the most important thing is be kind to other people and work with who you know supports you, and work together to support other people as well. And that'll help move shark science in the right direction and help in the field as well. Like Nakia was saying about being able to work with local people, or like Zoya was saying about actually going out and doing the hard work with the people at the early hours of the day, then people will respect you for doing that. And yeah. So we have still a lot more questions coming in. So another one that we had, which I'm actually not sure what this term means, so maybe someone can clarify, but this is for those of you who research the shark meat trade. Do you ever encounter xenophobia from your peers? If so, how do you combat it?
I think that's prejudice against Chinese people, isn't that? Mm-hmm. We do. Overall, when we talk about shark fisheries, I've heard a few times people saying, oh, those Chinese. And actually, surprisingly, the main actor in catching and importing and exporting shark meat is Spain. So obviously China has some importance as a trade hub, but European countries have a much bigger impact, and people don't know that. So I really hope that I can show that towards the end of our project. There's still a few years to go, but that's becoming pretty clear. The main actors are European countries. The US is not one of the major, it is a major producer, but it's also a place that exports and imports from pretty much everywhere in the world. So had to have a much bigger impact. So I really hope I can put this out there and, you know, make people stop blaming Chinese people for many things that they're not responsible for. So.
Zoe, do you want to speak to that as well, or do you think that Anna gave a good enough summary for now?
Yeah, I think Anna addressed it really well. Unfortunately, I have not heard of that. I mean, fortunately, because again, my work was mostly in India where people consume sharks. So yeah, I think Anna did a really good job of answering that.
Yeah, it's important to realize that it's I guess a multifaceted issue, and nobody is really doing things on purpose to be a bad person necessarily. And there's not only one player in shark meat and shark finning trade. Obviously, it's a very global industry, and lots of different people play a part in it. Even ourselves being careful with, I think someone previously mentioned shark products being in other products as well. So if anybody else doesn't know about this as well, but they found like shark oils in lipstick, for example, other makeup products, cat food sometimes. So just being aware of where your products come from, even we can help play a part in reducing some of the shark meat, shark finning trade as well. So kind of moving back to career advice for those of us who are interested in shark sciences as a career. Do any of the panelists want to speak on certain skills that they think are important? Do you all have scuba diving certifications, or what other skills have been essential to moving your career forward?
I can go first. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it depends on which direction that you're intending on going in. For me, yeah, I do a lot of diving. So scuba diving was an essential part of my career path. And I also dive in very challenging conditions. So like making sure that I am a confident and capable diver to do the research that I'm doing. But then I think we've also touched on just, I think a lot of us wish maybe we would have been more involved in stats courses and modeling courses and things that, you know, are super important in our career paths now. For me, I mean, I think this has been mentioned a few times, but I was also terrified of stats and math and would do anything to avoid it. And now that I'm in my PhD, I'm trying to take all the courses possible so that I can have that knowledge. And so, yeah, I think a mix of both, but it definitely depends on which direction that you want to go in.
Yeah, I might also add that I think this kind of goes back to one of the questions we had before about coming from a different background or like not doing perhaps like a biology or marine biology undergraduate. Is that a lot of the skills that I probably use the most or that come in handy most of the time are just the transferable skills I've picked up from various other parts, like other jobs and different parts of my life that have had nothing to do with marine biology. Things like communication, writing, the ability to, you know, get up and speak publicly, which is really terrifying at first, but will be really helpful for you if you can get experience in doing it as much as you can. Also just like data management, you know, learning how to keep things organized, having a nice file storage system, keeping your work backed up on hard drives, things like that, that, you know, are skills you can learn in any background, can really be helpful in academia, even if you don't think they're necessarily related to marine biology. And I work with a lot of people who did undergraduate degrees in physics, in computer science, sometimes even in business, and places, even sometimes the arts, you know, and they can contribute really valuable things to our research group. So yeah, I think it's important to also think about the skills that you use more broadly rather than just your field skills, because that's actually just a really small subset of what will help you in academia.
Yeah, for sure. And even I've found, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anna, if you want to add something as
I'm just
well.
gonna add one thing. I think what people like supervisors are looking for in a student is that you're able to plan, execute, and finish a project. If you don't know certain things, if you're not a diver, if you don't know stats yet, those are things that they can teach you. But I feel like management, personal management, and organization skills are extremely important, and we don't talk about that as much. And I think those are the most important things.
That's a really good point. The transferable skills are definitely important. And I think I've definitely ended up in researcher job situations where I didn't actually have the maybe technical skills that I needed for the position, but as long as I had the organizational and the ability to just being willing to learn new techniques too on the job and quickly, definitely benefited me. I started with just fisheries surveys and seining for small minnows, and that actually ended up being useful just from spending time in the water, walking around in the water, spending time outside. So you'd be surprised the different skills that you learn, how they can be transferable to shark science eventually. So this is kind of just a fun question, but do any of you want to share like one exciting experience that you've had in the field of shark research, or one memory that's really stuck with you that in interaction with the shark or interaction during your field work?
I can start again. And it was actually something I was gonna answer in the question about, someone asked if manta rays are dangerous, or do I ever run into any problems dealing with manta rays when I'm in the field, and safety precautions. So this is a memorable experience for me, because no, manta rays are not dangerous. They can't sting you, they can't bite you, but they're very big animals, and they're very friendly, inquisitive animals. And I just had a really interesting experience a couple of years ago where a manta ray came from behind me. There was lots of manta rays on the reef, and I was getting photo IDs, and a manta ray came behind me and decided that she wanted to squish me between the reef and herself. And she's probably, 1,000 kilos at least. So my dive buddy looked over, and I was squished between the reef and the manta, and I couldn't move. And I thought, oh, manta could actually kill me. I felt the pressure of her body, and I was like, luckily I was able to get out. But normally, no, that does not happen. And I think she was just a very friendly manta that wanted to give me a hug. That's the way I'm looking at it. But yeah, really just trying to stay out of their space, but like they love to be in your space, and that's the funny thing about them. So that's my funny story.
Nakia, I have a story about manta rays because I did not like manta rays. Shocking. I used to tell everyone, hate manta rays, never want to see them, never want to work with them, no interested, not interested at all. And one day I was working, I was tracking some of my baby stingrays, and a friend of mine was like, there's manta rays here, let's go swim with them. It's like, no, I don't want to. Stupid. She was like, let's go, they're just right here. Okay, I went. And those experiences that you have, it's like, to me, it's like in the Moana movie when like she gets her moment. I was swimming with these mantas. I'm sure they were looking at me, and they were like touching my hand, and we were swimming together, holding hands, and it was like the most amazing experience I ever had.
And now you love
them. For some reason
mantas.
I didn't like them before. It's so stupid.
Yeah, they're, the generic, I feel, species that everyone wants to go dive with and loves, and which is great. It's great, but there's a reason. They're so amazing, and they really do connect with your soul. It's really, really special.
Yeah, that's very cool. I hope that I have the chance to dive with mantas eventually. I haven't been able to yet, but speaking towards like being like being scared of sharks or rays or anything like that. When I first was interested in shark science, I thought I would just go dive with sharks once, and it would be like, wow, this big thrill-seeking adventure, and wow, I'm never gonna do that again. It's gonna be like one-time bucket list, check that off type thing. And then I went in the water with the sharks, and I was just like blown away. This is just so amazing to see all these species just like so calm and peaceful in the water, just like drifting back and forth and kind of like checking everyone out and like swimming around in the water. And then after that, I definitely was like, no, I have to do this 1,000 more times. There's no way that can be a one-time thing. So yeah, starting from thinking of them as like scary, dangerous predators, and once you see them and get to know them, you realize it's really just, yeah, they're great to be around for sure. Anyone else have any stories? Oh, Amani, go.
Mine is the first and only time that I've ever caught and worked up a sawfish. So sawfish are rays, they're not sharks. And they're also really endangered. And so in all honesty, I wasn't sure if I'd ever see one because I'm normally not in a location where I would catch one. And we caught it on a long line of all things. We caught a 13-foot sawfish, and I think I felt like I was dreaming because they look so bizarre. If you don't know what a sawfish looks like, look it up. You see them in pictures, and you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. And then you're next to a 13-foot sawfish and you're like, oh my gosh, you're crazy. Like, why do you have that saw on your face? And we did the whole workup. It was during mating season. So I was taking a muscle sample, and it took me 4 minutes to even get to the muscle with the biopsy punches that we have because her skin was so thick. And then we let her go, and she was just like so graceful swimming off. It's on video. It's on my Instagram if you want to look at it. There was like this beautiful sunset behind us, and we released this amazing sawfish. And then at the end, I was like, am I dreaming? Was that real? It was the best experience ever. I would love to relive it every single day for the rest of my life.
You're so lucky you're able to catch some of that on video too, that you actually got footage from that, because I feel like there's so many experiences like that you just don't have any footage of, and it's just in your mind, which is great too. But yeah, really nice to have that memory to look back on, and I will be looking it up for sure, that video. Zoya, did you have?
Yeah, so I have a memorable experience, but I don't think it's one that people would probably think of. So when I worked at the fish landing sites, it does tend to smell a lot because you're working with dead sharks and rays. And there was this one time when I went to get a ticket, to buy a train ticket right after my field site, not realizing that, there were like shark and ray smells on me or like on my equipment. And the lines to get the tickets were really, really long in India, but they just gave me a free pass and I could like do it really easily because of that. So yeah, that helped me. But luckily after I think a year or two of doing that, I got an opportunity to intern with the South African Shark Conservancy and in South Africa. And I held and saw my first shark. So that was pretty insane. Yeah. So moments like those really make it worth it. It was a pajama shark.
Oh, pajama shark.
Yeah,
cool.
It was pretty cool. And I didn't realize like just studying sharks, you're mentally like prepared that you shouldn't be scared of sharks, but still holding the shark, I realized that, okay, I still have a lot of things I need to like fears that I need to get over, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Did anyone else not share a story yet, or did everyone get the chance to talk?
Yeah, I have a story to add. Yeah, I guess I have a few. I feel like anytime you spend time in the field, it's just, you have so many small and like, I know, memorable experiences. But the most memorable for sure was one time when we were in the field and we were there when a shark gave birth. And we were able to kind of catch her pups and tag them straight away. So one of the big projects was to try and have a look at where, you know, these baby sharks were living and moving and how their population genetics were changing. So it was a really good opportunity to be able to catch them immediately on birth. But there were so many things I had just never thought about when it comes to, you know, brand newborn sharks. And one of the things I didn't know, and I think it varies between species, but these were lemon shark pups and they didn't have their teeth calcified yet. So they have almost these like gummy mouths where they haven't had their teeth come through. And nothing that is, you know, part of their body that is kind of cartilage based, it hasn't calcified yet. So all the kind of harder structures are really, really floppy. So when they first swim, their fins are just kind of like going all over the place and their little dorsal just kind of like wiggles around and they look completely disorientated because they're using the same muscles to swim, but they're just going in all these different directions. And yeah, when you try and tag them, they're just their whole body, because, you know, shark skin is quite rough. And usually in one direction, you know, kind of smooth, and then the other way is like sandpaper. But before they've had the chance to calcify, it's just completely smooth, really like slippery skin. And it was, yeah, just really unexpected. It made me think so much about, you know, when they're first born, how much of an adaptation that is, you know, and how much happens within the first hour of life that allows them to survive. And they're born into such extreme environments. So yeah, that was really something that I think changed my perception or interest, I think, in juvenile sharks. But yeah, an amazing day. I don't think I'll ever forget that one.
That is so cool. I can't imagine, like I see pictures of little baby sharks online and they're just so awkward, or like baby rays or something just flapping around, not really having any idea where they are. Yeah, so very, very cool. So we're kind of getting to the end of our shark panel today already. I feel like time has just like gone by so quickly. So we have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has any last minute questions, or Alexa, I'm not sure if you noticed any questions in the chat that haven't been answered as of yet, or if anyone wants to raise their hand as well, if they have any pressing questions. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, maybe we'll launch our, oh, it looks like there's one question, so we'll answer this quickly, then we'll launch our last poll. So this person is interested in researching ecology of sharks, populations, animal behavior, travel patterns, to help them tag them in the field, measure them, observe them in the environment. Do you need a PhD to do work like that, or would a master's be enough to participate in that research?
I think there are master projects with taggings. Yeah, I don't think you need a PhD for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you could do a master's with the tagging project, no problem, as long as you kind of went into it prepared and ready, and, you know, had everything kind of lined up and ready to go. Because the thing with tagging is that it takes a while to get the data back. And if a master's is only a year or two, you might be quite pressed for time. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible.
Yeah, and your question too will be really important. So if you look at seasonal differences, for example, so you have to be in the field at least for 12 months or more. So you need to take all of that into consideration.
I also think it's really important to point out that a master's and a PhD are two very different things, and they're both a means to two very different ends. So if you want to, you know, do research, but also write grants and teach and grade and things like that, then a PhD is for you, right? You could go get a PhD, you could teach in academia, you can do your own research because you can write your own grants. But if those are not things that you want to do, then having a master's is great. Like if you want to get a government job, for example, in New Jersey, they have a shark tagging program and you only need a master's to join it. You're not leading the research, you're helping with it, but that is a big fieldwork component. So the advice that I always give people when they are asking about how to choose between a master's and PhD is look up job listings of like what your dream job is in 5 or 10 years and see what they want from you, what qualifications they want, because they're telling you right there if you would need, you know, a master's or a PhD for that position. They're two, you know, very different things. A PhD requires a lot more work. You know, it's 4 or 5, maybe 6 years of your life. and you're teaching at the same time and you're doing lots of other things, whereas a master's, like, you're going for the school to get your thesis out and then basically go into non-academia work industry, at least here in the United States. So just, consider those two differences in whether or not you need a PhD or a master's.
Yeah, that's really great advice. It's definitely important to keep in mind what your end goal is before you just keep going through schooling, thinking that it's going to be beneficial regardless. So yeah, definitely really good advice on that. So we're having our closing poll now, so we're just asking all of you, what's one new thing you learned from our panelists today? So as you fill that out, I was wondering if each of the panelists want to mention any last notes or takeaways that they didn't feel like they got to talk about today. You can go ahead if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we can keep moving forward. No, you're all good. You feel like you talked about.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I actually learned a lot from the other panelists too. So this was great.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it was a really big learning experience for me too. I definitely learned a lot from each of you, and I was excited to hear about all of your current research, because I know some of you from past experience or school, but I don't necessarily know exactly what you're doing or researching. So that was super interesting. And to hear just cool shark stories, I'm always happy about that. So, and also, so while we're finishing this poll, we did have a prize draw for a manta ray. So you adopt and you get to name a manta ray from the Zavra Marine Lab, which is Nakia's marine lab as well. So if somebody wants to give a drum roll for the next panelist. So our winner today is, and when I call out your name, if you could just raise your hand or send a message in the chat to make sure that you're receiving this message. So our winner today is Elise Hayden. Congratulations. Yeah, so congratulations on that. And we'll be in touch with you later about how you're going to be able to, oh, I see your hand up there. Okay, awesome. You can unmute yourself as well if you'd like. Oh, I see you say yay. Okay. So we'll send you an email to let you know how that's going to work, and you can choose your name for the manta ray. So I think we'll end the poll now, and we'll just go over some of everyone's last responses and what everyone's learned. So learned that fear of being accepted into grad programs was more of a mental block than a real barrier. That's fantastic. I'm glad that you were able to get that takeaway. For sure, that's really important to keep in mind. Super interesting field. Didn't realize sharks were a staple in the diet of several countries. That's awesome that you were able to learn that as well. Shark scientists are super cool. Wow, thank you for saying that about all of our panelists. I agree, everyone here is super cool today. I'm sure people who are in our group are also, like in their participants are also amazing people. You all have an interest in sharks, so I'm sure you can all go far if you just keep working towards your goals and following your passions. Seems like a lot of people learn new facts. Yeah, learned things about how to move ahead in the career. So yeah, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you all were able to participate today. You can stop sharing your screen now, Alexa. Thanks. And thanks again to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you guys coming out today, and this was an amazing experience for myself, and I hope that everyone was able to take away at least one interesting fact and learn that anyone can be shark biologists. You just have to follow your passions and your goals, and you'll get there eventually, even if it's not a straight trajectory.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks. You killed it. Well done.
Thank you.
Fantastic.